Some would say the electronic health environment today is some of it a big mess. It's really an interesting area, and we wanted to talk to Scott Finfer, who is the CEO of EMRs, and we're talking about castles of steel. It's a look at what happens when pre-modern strategies collide with modern technologies. And you use World War I in a great way to talk about this issue. Before we get there, tell me about EMRs, and then we'll talk about World War I.
Okay. So EMRs is clinical decision support, and I think it's important to understand when we talk about clinical decision support that there's basically two types of clinical decision support. There's outcomes and procedural-based clinical decision support, which would be where we suggest to a doctor, hey, the outcomes would suggest that using a medicated stent versus a non-medicated stent is going to give you a better outcome. That's not what we're talking about, and that's not what we do. We take the data that's inside of the EMR, we run it against the most appropriate guidelines and appropriate use criteria, and we help identify patients that fit within the patient population so that we provide better data and the doctors can make better decisions with better data.
Well, trying to get to that data is the big important factor here. You say the challenges facing medicine are surprisingly similar to the battle challenges of World War I. I love history. Let's go back and compare where we're at now and the mess we're in with World War I.
Okay. Well, as a starting point, I think one of the most interesting points from World War I was a decision that was made by the Germans in fighting the Royal Navy. The Germans, with a very small fleet, were able to wreak havoc on the high seas. And up until that point, the British Navy, the Royal Navy, was considered the fiercest and most powerful navy ever to set sail in the world. But yet, a small band of 60 ships, the German U-boats, they never had more than 60 of these ships at sea during the course of the entire war, was able to completely decimate shipping throughout the world. They sank over almost 5,000 ships during the course of that, with 60 ships in full-time action, and their losses during that same time period, 178 ships. So the Germans lost 178 U-boats, they sank 5,000, and part of the problem for why that was happening was because up until that point, the British mandate was, we fight battles above the water. They weren't prepared to deal with it, and they never addressed the issue because they said, we're the mighty British, and until they were prepared to deal with that, it was a very bad situation.
So some of the management decisions today have been very similar to the decisions by the British government back then.
Whether by accident or by choice, yes. What's happening is we have these systems and these ways that we've always done things, and as technology presents new opportunities in new ways, we don't always take advantage of them. And what's even worse than that is sometimes we embrace the technology, but then we don't utilize it for what it's designed with. Another example of this is with the British. So they came up with the British Dreadnought. In 1906, they came out with the HMS Dreadnought, the most powerful surface vessel ever to sail the seas. This thing had steel this thick, it had 21 guns on it, it had small guns on it. I mean, it was faster, it was quicker, it was better, it was more maneuverable. And what did the British do? They did what the British always do. They took that ship and they assigned it to a fleet with all the old ships from 100 years ago. Some of them sail power, some of them gas power, some of them diesel power. And what ends up happening is you end up being constrained by the lowest common denominator. So instead of getting the benefit of what these dreadnoughts could do, they were actually operating to the old technology, and they were spending the money and deploying the new technology and not getting any benefit from doing that. And until they broke off these dreadnoughts and created their own killer ships, killer fleets, they had a very big problem on their hands.
So now in the 21st century, we have a problem on our hands. We have great technology. Is it being used correctly?
In some places, there are situations where there are outliers that are ahead of the curves. We see it all the time. We run across lots of hospital systems and lots of doctors' practices that really are embracing technology. I think, though, if you look across the board, what's happening is a combination of either not embracing technology or potentially not using technology that's available to you. Another example of this would be the machine gun. So prior to World War I, a British guy named Maxim invented the modern-day machine gun. And he came to the British Army and he showed it to him. And he said, hey, I got this technology, I got this gun, this thing's amazing. And they said, it takes 5 guys to operate it, and it's not perfect, and it doesn't do everything we'd like it to do. We're not interested. The Germans looked at this thing and they said, well, the enemy of good is great. This thing's pretty good. And they embraced it. They had 100,000 of these things compared to like 200, 250 from the British. And as was the case during the initial years of the war, the Allies found themselves at a great disadvantage because they were using an old technique, which was a stiff upper lip and over the top, boys, follow me. We're going to take them out with sheer will and sheer manpower. And you just can't charge a machine gun nest.
Yeah,
so
exactly.
I think it starts with going back to the basics, first and foremost. Let's not wait for the perfect solution to present itself. Let's look for the good solution that's available today and embrace that and start with a baseline to go from there. The other thing that we need to do is we need to look at how we've done things in the past versus how we need to do things in the future. A good example of this would be the idea of discrete data. One of the things that we often see happening when a practice transitions from a paper system to the EMR system is that they've got a lot of data in that paper system that they want to get into the EMR system, and it hasn't necessarily been thought through all the way. So what ends up happening is all that information is abstracted and put as a scan into the EMR, which is not usable through IT searches. You can't search for the information. So if we begin to build better systems, if we begin to use discrete data, if we accept the fact that we're not perfect right now, and we change how we do things, and we utilize the systems as they're developed, we can really get a lot of power out of what's available to us today.
So how about having notes taken in the office, handing off the notes to somebody and having them input it later? Does that work?
That doesn't work, and that's, we surprisingly enough, we see that even in some very sophisticated practices where the doctors aren't using the EMRs currently. They're doing things how they did them before. They're taking notes, and at the end of the day, that information is then populated into the system. The disadvantage of this is, one, it's not efficient, and two, it takes away the benefit of point-of-care support while you're seeing the patient.
So do you think we're going to get there, and how long is it going to take?
We're going to get there. There's no question about that. I don't know how long it's going to take, but we're on our way.
And there's going to be a few headaches and bumps along the way, I would imagine.
Absolutely.
So again, we're at the Cardiovascular Summit here in Las Vegas for 2014. Please see our coverage in CSWN as well as online. For CardioSource World News, I'm Executive Editor Rick McGuire.